Hey guys, welcome back. Last week we
Howdy.
talked a little bit about discipline, and we're going to kind of further that. We're going to jump into maybe something more along the lines of training.
Couple things. First of all, Rick, Sean, if you're new with us, welcome.
Thanks.
To the podcast that has no name.
It doesn't.
We don't have a name
podcast.
yet. No, the goal is to just talk about stuff, which is what all podcasts are, but specific to life, parenting, from a Christian perspective. It's really kind of hopefully speaking to anybody that's out there, but our church family, and we have a certain amount of experience when it comes to kids, both raising kids and interacting with kids who are not our own, and so. Yeah, the first week we kind of gave a bit of an overview. Last week we kicked off talking about discipline, specifically the physical discipline and early on kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then as our time kind of ran out, we could let's punt to the next time to talk about a little bit more specifically the training thing. And let's start with a verse that's in Scripture, which train a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he should not depart from it.
Yeah, right? It's a simple Scripture. I think a lot of people have heard of it. Yeah. I think if you haven't maybe seen it on some sort of Jesus picture or something like that.
His flowing hair.
Yeah, flowing hair and blue eyes. You definitely come across it, I think, if you look hard enough. But one of the cool things, Robert Nolan, I think is his name. I went and listened to him speak a couple years ago. He wrote a cool book called The Knight's Code.
Yeah.
I really like the book. It's a great book for men as far as just how to father. I might even take a look into that sometime. But when he was speaking, he mentioned that verse, and I'm like, yeah, I've heard of that verse. And he kind of went back into the kind of the Hebrew, the way it was originally written, and explained out what it actually meant. And it was just baffling, because at that point I had 2 kids, and they were both pretty young. I judge how old I am based off of how many kids I have. And it was train a child in the way that they bend, and they'll not stray far from it, which is cool.
Translation has become English in a way that they should go, but the original could be translated in the way they bend.
Which is really an interesting thought. And my daughter might kind of tend to go this way, but as long as we're getting to the same goal at the end of the day, how can I work with that bend as opposed to my son who might be more this way?
Yes.
And so that really kind of revitalized how I was looking at my children as they are growing up. Yeah. So very cool verse.
So a couple of things that I hope to accomplish within the next 15 minutes or so. One is a little bit of application, understanding every kid's a little different. And so what are some maybe practical things that you can try, whether your kids are young or they're older, or you're in a different scenario, you know what I mean, house-wise, right? If you're, if mom and dad are not both at home, or grandparents are in the mix, or different influences are there, what are some practical things that can go into helping the actual training part?
Yes.
So last time we really talked kind of overarching about the importance of discipline, and maybe a little bit how we've done it. And today I would love to get a little practical about the training part. I will say this. I had a conversation with somebody, it was a while back, and they were talking about their kids, and they also had more than 2. So there's 3 or 4 kids at their house at the time. And they were really struggling with their kids would be argumentative about things, especially in their teenage years.
Yeah.
And they would use the phrase, "It's not fair. My brother or my sister got to do this." And they would really harp on that. And then mom and dad were like, "Oh, that's right, it's not fair." And they were kind of getting pulled into the trap of oh no, they need everything to be fair. Also, I recognize a temptation even in my own life and with my own kids of oh, they both need the same toys or the same amount of things or the same kind of attention. And that idea of fairness becomes a thing. What that verse implies, and this is a thing that as I interact with different kids, different families, and my own different kids, is there's no such thing as every kid gets the same amount of stuff and turns out correctly, because every kid's different. So maybe talk about a difference between, you don't have to do all four, but maybe pick two of your kids. Yeah. How are they extremely different? And then I will maybe do a same. Like, here's a couple ways my son and daughter are insanely different.
Yeah, so my oldest son is definitely like rule follower. If other people are breaking the rules, there's some tattling going on kind of thing, which there's some correcting going on there as well. Yeah, but definitely different kind of a correction, because he tends to want to hit the mark as best as he can. And when he sees other people are straying off, that kind of bothers him. So, so discipline looks a lot different for him. His is more refocusing rather than physically corralling. Yeah. Whereas my daughter, who's very much a free spirit and super creative, but she tends to live it more on the chaotic side of things. Yeah. She likes a messy room. She likes papers everywhere. She knows where they are, but it's definitely not like the type A, I guess, maybe. So keeping her kind of on track to hit this mark looks a lot different. Yeah. It's more like gentle nudgings back towards the fold. Yes. As we see her kind of like going off in any number of different directions. Yes. So that's maybe how it looks different for those two. Yeah.
So I have almost the identical dichotomy with my kids, with my two kids. Yeah. I've got a rule follower, some super easy. If you tell them to do one thing, it's like they do it. Yeah. Maybe one time, every now and again they'll because it's a child, right? So they're gonna be defiant every now and again. Exactly. However, but from other child, not so much. Rules are like they sound like suggestions. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they're like not suggestions. So same thing, messy room, a little more free spirit. Yeah. One kid is easy to motivate. Mm-hmm. You simply like, hey, why don't you do this? And they'll do it to the best of their ability. Yeah. The other one is like, how don't you do this? Is not enough. It's got to be like, let me lay out a whole case for why you should do this. Let me lay out a whole like bit of motivators to why you shouldn't be afraid. Like this whole different beast. And then it also shows up in how they misbehave, actually. And so my straight and narrow kid very rarely misbehaves and is very apt to tell on people who do. Yeah. And my not straight and narrow, arrowed kid is very much more like my personality, which, again, speed limits are suggestions as opposed to the rule, things of that nature. And I recognize that I have to have very direct, longer conversations with that child than the other one is simply no, right? And so it looks different for sure. Yeah. And then I have a kid that has a physical touch love language and also a words of affirmation love language. And I have a kid who is a gifts love language as well as a quality time love language. Yeah. And so recognizing that those elements are different means if I give this one the same amount of time as this one, it's not going to feel fair, even though it is fair. So
one thing I think to continue that string of thought is that I had to kind of realize after the fact when I saw some unsettledness between my
unsettled nation, unsettled territory
between my two older kids because they're further along in growing up, was the idea of this fairness and actually like transforming that into words so that they can realize why this doesn't look fair on paper. Yeah. And that was a big deal and a big turning point for them in their stability as far as how they saw me loving them. Yeah. One would attempt to do things that this one liked, even though they had no interest in it, just to spend the quality time that was there. And so we had to like realize, okay, you don't have to like this thing just because I like it. I still like you even if you don't like that thing. Yeah. And so we had to kind of rework it. But I think that's that bend, like just figuring out how they're wired and then finding those touch points just to keep bringing them back to that. Yes. To that, as opposed to like strict and stiff regulations where it's only going to shatter the relationship. Yes. Particularly for bendy kids. Yes. I think.
Stop the presses. I remembered it. Wait, before I forget. No, I almost have to write it down. Well, I was trying to think of a thing that we were going to talk about, and then I couldn't remember it, and then it went away, and then it came back, and I think it's going away again. But
No, don't.
don't let it do it. Let me say the first thing, and then maybe it'll come back forever and just in cement. But it did. It was like, and it went back in there. What is the verse in Ephesians, the parents part? Parents, do not exasperate your kids. That was the thing that kept like, go away. The idea of exasperating your children. I want to take a second and I want to talk about what's it mean to exasperate our kids. And let's just discuss that a little bit because it's a weird word. And I think it has a ton of depth and it has to do with this idea to an extent, but then also to another, like a danger zone that I think it's important to maybe challenge, be reminded of as parents. Exasperated. The official definition is basically bring to anger, or extreme anger. It kind of implies like not. If I exasperate you because I've been like interrupting you while you're talking or whatever, you could feel exasperated, right? So that is a entry level version of the exasperation. When it talks about parents don't exasperate your kids, I think it's talking about it from a long-term perspective. Probably the best way to describe it is that, as a kid grows up, they never can do anything good enough to achieve their parents' affection or to feel valued or to feel safe from their parents. I think that would lead to exasperation. I think it's a long-term deal. Yes. Any other thoughts?
No,
about
I think
specifically?
I think you can see it in the short term, but I think the long term is obviously more detrimental. But my thing on that, and I don't know how far we want to dive into this, or if you're saving this, thinking of this for later, but that exasperation, what does that actually look like? And that's like inconsistencies in your discipline, or inconsistencies in rules and guidelines. Those definitely show up, or letting your own crap and junk affect their lives. I think those are two main ways that I've kind of seen it creeping up here and there, and it's like, okay, we got to refocus.
Absolutely. I again, the interrupting example is actually a really good example. So if you're talking and I just continue to interrupt you, that is like me being irritating, right? So so we're not talking about us irritating our children or just making them slightly upset, because there's always going to be a point when your kids are upset with you, right? If you're parenting well and you're disciplining, like we talked about last week, the idea of the rod actually potentially breaking a sheep's leg to put them back in to the right path. We're not talking about physically breaking a leg. However, short-term pain, they are upset with you for a time. They are not like on friendly terms with you for a time, but you are the adult and saying, no, I'm holding the course in order to get us back to good. So that's not the idea that we're talking about, them being annoyed, but rather the long-term effects. And I think whenever you don't have consistency in your rules, or let me not actually provide discipline on the other extreme, I think what happens is you get kids who are like, we don't know how to achieve personal success. We don't know how to achieve social success. We don't know how to interact. Like at that point, then you see exasperation. And so both in like them just growing older and being healthy, but then also in the relationship. So you may not be old enough. You might be. Have you ever seen the movie The Great Santini?
So I know of the movie. I have not seen it.
No, so this is, I think, I want to say late 70s. This movie came out. I believe it's Robert Duvall. Maybe. That's neither here nor there. Whoever was really in it was like, that wasn't Robert. So it's not like, hey, you got to see, it's not The Godfather. However, it was a really well done movie that depicted a dad who was exasperating his children, basically. Now that came out in some verbal and physical abuse, which I will say, absolutely, if you want to put your kids on the fast track to exasperation, allow abuse to happen in the home. I'm lucky that I grew up in a household and my wife grew up in a household where that was not a thing. The idea that sins get passed down generation to generation, I think especially hold true when it comes to family issues. And so it's never been on my radar or my wife's radar at this point to fall into either verbal or physical abuses.
Right.
However, that's not everybody's story. And so I know a lot of people who have struggled in this area, but I also know a lot of people that have had victory in this area, and they recognize like, okay, that's going to end with me, and it's going to end here now. And I will just say that it's never too late to make a change, to get counseling or help, or just to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, this has been how it has happened in our house up to this point, but I'm going to do my level best to not do that moving forward. I would say, obviously, varying degrees of physical or emotional or verbal, extreme abuse or lesser. I don't know if is there a lesser term for that? Whatever. That's really heavy. So, but that leads to exasperation. Kids grow up and they just feel like they don't are not worth what they should be worth. They miss out on understanding who God is, and there's a responsibility to parents. And I carry this as a dad from a Christian perspective. This is like a long rant. Didn't mean for it to be. From a Christian perspective of like, at the end of the day, my kids are going to represent or understand God as Father, and I'm going to play a role into that. And I'm going to play into their understanding of value because of that. So, I want to make sure that I'm doing my very best to be as good as I can be. That doesn't mean perfect. And one thing as a part of that, I do my very best to be honest with them when I make a mistake and ask for forgiveness from my kids when I make a mistake. And sometimes I think as parents we can not ever admit fault, not ever admit mistakes, but just like bang on them or put our stuff on them. And that's I wish I knew a better word than abuse. Abuse is so strong, but I think it can lead to that. But if there's lesser levels of that, you're just understanding that it can compound and leave kids exasperated. And that is before you even touch the extreme versions of abuse, which psychologically stall kids. The exasperation is like immediate and long lasting when it's extreme. It's so if that's a danger zone, right? So in general, I will say, trying to go back to Lightville. All right.
No, I got something. Unless you had
do it.
Okay, so one thing that I do to kind of counteract some of that, because I think there's a natural tendency to get frustrated. To fall into some old habits and things like that. I think there's a natural tendency, and just being aware of that and having somebody else to kind of come alongside you and that obviously is your spouse, but then also people outside of that. One thing that I've done that's really helped me out a lot in that context of not exasperating, especially with my super bendy child, is not to kind of keep like pounding into her head that this is wrong, but try and figure out why she's actually doing that thing and find another healthy outlet for that thing. One of the awesome parts, and I don't think it's a big deal, it's my daughter. She's one of the awesome things about her is she loves being creative and expressing herself. But it's a silly thing, but it has gone to like doing science experiments in our bathroom. And that's like, stop. We're in a rental right now, and that's especially stop. Like, we don't have to pay for this. So like, one of the things we're in the meat of this issue actually right now is, okay, how do we take that creativity and that longing to like experiment and play and learn? How do we take that and put it into healthy context?
Absolutely. So
instead of just saying no, stop, don't, stop, no. So that's kind of where I'm doing.
So the extreme exasperation was the stuff that we just talked about, but then that is the other side, which does a great segue to the other part. I will say, if I tried to make everything the same between my son and my daughter, I would exasperate both of them. Right?
Oh, for sure.
Because this kid needs to be disciplined differently or encouraged differently or valued even or spoken to differently. To try to do it the same, especially as they get older, right? The rules are probably going to be a little different for my daughter when she becomes a teenager and drives than it is going to be for my son, just by nature of them as personalities and as different gender kids and stuff. Now I want to take that and I want to talk about something that we got feedback within the context of the unnamed podcast about specifically the difference between a kid who is defiant versus a kid who is compliant was the terms they used. Basically a strong-willed child versus a not strong-willed child. And I will say that I have a child, but neither one of my kids are really strong-willed. They have varying degrees, but I have one who is very much not strong-willed, who is, I think I already said, here's your box, and they're like, yay, the box.
Yeah, they love the box.
Yes, versus a defiant child or a strong-willed child. What's it look like? How do you press up against that? Are any of your kids strong-willed, would you say?
Yeah. One right now that we know of.
Yeah.
As they grow up, you learn a little differently. The other one maybe, possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely been something where my wife and I have to keep coming back and strengthening our relationship to deal with that relationship.
Yeah.
And deal with it, I think, is maybe a negative kind of term. I don't mean it that way, but just so that we're healthy enough to realize that as we're kind of continually trying to take that will and not break the will, because it's there, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think I was strong-willed at one point, and that kept me from doing a lot of things I didn't want to do, or that I wasn't supposed to do.
Yeah.
But to keep coming back, my wife's name is Laurel, to keep coming back with Laurel and strengthening each other so that we can kind of keep shaping that bend.
Yeah.
Because, very strong-willed, sometimes defiant just for the sake of being defiant. And okay, why?
Yeah. So I was trying to kind of get my head around, because I have not had a specific experience as a parent, but I've seen other kids and how they interact with their parents. / I've also been alongside families as a youth pastor in particular, where they have a strong-willed or defiant child. And I think there's two kinds of kids. So the one kind of kid is basically like a velociraptor, like from Jurassic Park. They would test the fence in different areas to see if they could get out. It's a sweet little velociraptor.
Easy.
Exactly. But so they're testing boundaries. So here's a boundary over here, and then kid says okay, but then they test the boundary over here, and they're not connected directly, right? It seems like, I'm saying no, and then no, and then no, and then no, and then no again, and then no again, and then here's a preemptive no, just so you can deal with it later.
Take this one, put it in your pocket.
Yeah, so there's that kind of kid, and then there's another kind of kid, and a lot of times they interact, but the other one is stubborn, where they're just stubborn. And I've seen more of this kid. The other kid, I think all kids push boundaries to a certain extent, but I think it's the stubborn kid who's going to keep pushing. And the stubborn kid, my one brother went through a phase where he was like this. I personally tend to be really stubborn, but I was never defiant. I had as a kid in particular, I had a sense of responsibility. And so, how do you deal with a defiant kid? So I got two thoughts about this, maybe three. The first one is, we come back to what we've talked about a couple times: consistency, consistency. And then the second part of that consistency is, what do you call it when you have built up good running stamina? There's a word for that. I don't know. Whatever, doesn't matter.
Okay.
We'll just say stamina.
Okay.
Consistency, and then you have to be able to keep at it, right?
Oh, yeah.
You got to encourage yourself to keep going.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a part where you're just like, all right, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. You're going to give in to the kid, and you can't give in to the kid.
Right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
You almost always you have to double down. This is where mom and dad working together is a huge deal. If you don't have mom and dad working together, if it's a different situation, ask for help. I can't emphasize that enough. Ask for help from church family, from small group, from parents, anybody that would say yes, right? But you got to work at it. You can't just I'm asking for help and then dump. You got to be willing to work too, because I have seen that as well. Where you get to the end of your rope, you ask for help, and then you dump your kids, and then you come back and they're not getting reinforced. So you absolutely have to consistency, and then stamina. There's a different word for that too. I can't think of it.
Not
but
endurance.
Endurance.
Oh, endurance.
Endurance.
Oh, okay.
It can't be as simple as endurance.
You're welcome.
Absolutely, it is endurance. Endurance. And then the other deal, I would say, the other probably big practical thing would be, as soon as your kids are old enough that you recognize that they have stubborn tendencies or defiant tendencies, like redirect that. This was akin to what you were talking about, your daughter's science projects, right?
Yeah.
You redirect that energy to something specifically that is responsibility driven.
Yeah.
Right? So something where you're like, hey, if you do this, this is this is a consequence if it doesn't happen, right? So this is not the empty job, this is the big job, or the thing that's gonna take a lot of work. If you can get their energy into something that works a little bit, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
This is why I'm like a huge proponent for extracurriculars with some extracurriculars in school, music, learning an instrument, and sports, like specifically running, which is an endurance and discipline thing. Like it just teaches and reinforces some things, and it puts energy. Like if you can get a kid to like decide that they want to run and they're a little bit stubborn about it, like it is going to focus that, like laser focus that energy, which they're made that way for a reason, right? So lean into it. So those would be the biggest practical things I could say about that kind of kid.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and that's something we've definitely seen that's worked super well in our houses, kind of leaning into who they are and finding out how that good outlet. Yeah. To focus that energy, or focus the stubbornness, or focus the whatever creativity.
Yeah, and then there's probably one other element I would say, and then we can talk about this probably in a future session at more length, but we talk about it as a church quite a bit. Figuring out how they need to feel loved and valued. Yeah. Which is a little bit different than because you don't always think about the like, oh, they're being annoying, right? And how do I value them? But there's a lot of times that those are crying out for attention that they need, or affection that they need, and so sometimes stubborn or defiant behavior over here is really just, hey, they need a present, or they need like a note or an encouraging word. Yep. We actually had a situation like this just recently with my daughter, who like she was doing some stuff over here, and then she has had the wherewithal, because we tried to train her to communicate with us. She had the wherewithal to be like, I needed you to say this because I was feeling like this, and we're like, oh, she's like wise beyond her years. That's awesome. That's good. But that kind of redirection, we probably could talk about the love languages in a future session, which would be really helpful. Yeah, likely.
But I think so. I think that's. We're kind of getting towards the end of our time. Like big takeaways from today, I think, is really like trying to sit down and figure out, one, maybe why your children are behaving a certain way, good or bad. Yeah. So like positive reinforcement, or rather reinforcement for positive things, I should say it that way. Or if there's like possibly a cry for help, or just a different way that they're bending, we really need to like sit back and focus in on those things, and then take the discipline and the training and really kind of cater it to how they're kind of moving, so that we can ultimately get into that goal where they're safe and happy and healthy and joyful and seeking God at the end of the road. Yeah.
The only thing I'll add to that, maybe just two things, and I think we already said them, but it's worth saying again. Whatever, just say it a whole bunch of times. Have you ever been annoyed by your kids?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Or really angry? Yeah. That's good. Yeah. We all get annoyed by our kids. We all get really angry at our kids sometimes. We all have days when we're stressed out, and our kids do not help. There are days when my kids are awesome. They're at a fun stage. I genuinely like, dude, I got cool kids. That is awesome. I feel as though they're a blessing. And yet there are days when I'm like, I don't like you right now. That is part of the human condition. It's part of being a parent. And so if you're up against it and you're feeling like, I'm just not feeling it right now, or you're stressed out, man, don't despair. You can get through it, and you are going to get through it, and you just keep doing your very best to be consistent. And then the second thing, just to reiterate, man, ask for help. And then I will say this as a sign-off, or maybe not a sign, I don't know, whatever.
Sign-off sounds good.
So two things that we're going to cover in a future session, if not two sessions, just because I think they're really important. So one is digital, parenting in a digital world.
That's its whole lesson on its own, I think.
Yeah. I read a book, which we probably won't go through the whole book, but is all about that. And the whole generation of kids who right now, if they're under 25, are struggling massively with depression, like on unprecedented levels. How do we parent in that kind of a time? Yeah. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And then the other thing, which we just said that we're going to talk about, but I already forgot.
It's all good.
It had to do with discipline. Further.
The exasperation thing?
No, love languages.
Love languages.
Yeah, I knew there was another thing we just said.
Yeah, love languages, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
That'd be awesome.
All right, man. I look forward to that. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, it'd be killer.
Yeah.
All right, hey, hopefully you'll join us with that. Like, post, share, write in the comments, anything you want to hear. All right, see ya.
See ya.